started doing some digging. I'm a keen user of X, and every now and then I see something trending or a buzzword floating around, and I think I'm going to have to look into that, won't I? And people have been making a mention of the Fabian Society. Now, I've heard of the Fabian Society lots before. I was well aware that it existed. I'm sure in my career as a journalist, I might have interviewed people representing the Fabian Society. I knew it was a left-wing think tank that publishes research papers, and the various Labour Party politicians are connected to it. And I thought, all right, that's that then. Nothing to see here. Nothing weird about that. Lots of right-wing think tanks, aren't there? The IEA, Policy Exchange, various affiliated MPs, even prime ministers. And so I just thought that, anything that sort of digs around in the weeds there and tries to make it sound like something more than it is just pure conspiracy theory. But then, I was sitting on the train and thought, I'm going to have a look at this. And so I went on their website and I started looking at some of the examples of their research papers, things like why we should have no borders whatsoever, etc. I then looked at their bragging rights over who their members, and we're not just talking about members sort of loosely associated. We're talking sort of sit on the executive committee, all work together. We're talking sort of cabal level involvement. And they proudly boast that all the Labour prime ministers have been Fabian, and that half of Sir Keir Starmer's cabinet are not just sort of associated, but eyeball deep in the Fabian Society. And I thought, okay, right, so all of our Labour politicians, seemingly, who have any positions of power, come from this. Then I found out it wasn't just politicians. Oh, no, heads of quangos, the governor of the Bank of England, loads of people are connected to this. And they have pretty radical ideas about the world. And then I thought, well, okay, what do we know? And you look at their original emblem, which is a wolf wearing a sheep, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And they basically say, we want radical global socialism, but we're not going to do it via revolution. No. We're going to be the wolf in sheep's clothing. Quite literally, they changed that emblem to a turtle. Again, this idea that, slowly, won't suspect us of anything, but before you know it, guess what? Your Western values, your culture, your customs, your heritage, your capitalism, your progress, your profitability, your prosperity, all of it is going to be destroyed, even the concept of a nation state, because that is their radical end goal. And you know what? When you dig down, it's happening. It has happened. It is taking place today. Rather than listen to me proselytise about that, I decided to get two experts on the subject to come on and talk about it, because I think it's a very, very serious matter indeed. Joseph Robertson, political strategist, has written a long Substack on the Fabian Society, the quiet hand of socialism. The brilliant Steven Barrett, himself a barrister, knows a thing or two about the influential figures, including some top lawyers, and their connection to the Fabian Society. Joseph, I'm going to start with you, because someone listening to this for the first time will be thinking, well, who are these people and why should we be worried? So I want you to sort of kick off with an overview of the Fabian Society, if you would.
Yeah, well, I mean, to your average listener, they probably never even heard of the Fabian Society. And if you ask people even on the left of politics, they might think it's some kind of low-level think tank that has little groups around the country that meet up to discuss policy, sometimes doing slightly bigger conferences. But the reality is this is a behemoth, not only in terms of the individuals it's produced, but also the length of time it's been around. I mean, it's been around for 140 years or so, and it was essentially the group that founded the Labour Party. It was what we call a gradualist movement, which means they like Marxism, but they don't believe in revolution. So that basically means they want to do things slowly. And boy, have they succeeded. I mean, from the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, all the way through to the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, all the way through to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. They have all of their best and brightest arrayed in these positions. And as you say, they have a very, very clear and stated mission statement. It's not something they keep hidden. They might be wolves in sheep's clothing, but I don't see much of the sheep's clothing. It's very much a mission to destroy the nation state and rebuild it piece by piece. And I think Tony Blair was one of their key assets in doing this. He was the guy who, of course, brought in things like the Supreme Court, the rule of law as an oath, which the Lord Chancellor takes, and I'm sure Stephen will go on to the meaning of that and why it's so important. But he really created a separation of powers. He began what I call the back door to cultural regicide, because, of course, Marxists love nothing more than beheading a king. And I think that's the best overview I can give to you right now.
I think that was a very consummate overview. Stephen, let's talk about the role that the lawyers are playing in this, because it seems to me that, yes, they sort of get people in top positions at the IMF, the World Bank, the Bank of England, Number 10, Quangos. But when I look at the context of today and the project that many said that Tony Blair started, it largely seems to have been executed via legal structures. And what we have now is a Prime Minister whose excuse for everything is, well, that's just international law. Talk to me about how the Fabians have essentially built this edifice, which has essentially stripped the country of democracy and stripped those who really do wield power of any accountability.
Well, yes, and I wouldn't say it was all the law. It's been, and you're right to highlight international law, and something that your listeners and viewers might know of as international public law and human rights barristers and human rights lawyers. This is the clique that we are dealing with. The types of law that run the economy have largely been left untouched. But just so your listeners and viewers know, I believe that the Court of Appeal judge who heard the Bell Hotel Epping case should not have heard the case. I think we have a legal test called apparent bias, and I think it was more than satisfied on the six. I identify 6 reasons why he was too close to the government to hear the case. But he is also a Fabian, and I put in a complaint, which is all I have no more powers than a member of the public. So all we can do is to put in a complaint with the Judicial Conduct Office about the conduct of the judge, because he conducted himself badly by hearing a case when he probably shouldn't have heard it, because he at least gives the impression of apparent bias. And that complaint will be judged ultimately by Shabana Mahmood, who is linked to the Fabian Society. Oh. And the judge is a Fabian. So how am I to have any faith in that process? And which genius thought that having a secret society in Great Britain would in any way end up doing any form of good? The other thing I'd like to flag, because I think it gets missed, is that Orwell, who was a proper socialist, a proper lefty, he didn't like these people. And there's a reason why 1984 is 1984, because the Fabians are founded in 1884. And with their slow movement, he thought they'd get their way by 1984. Now, we've held them off. We've held them at bay. We've got to 2025. But by the skin of our teeth, we appear to be in the middle of something that is just not decent, moral, or good, or professional, or it seems to be some sort of cultish ideology. And it's a cult. Alex, I'd really like to highlight this. They're not the best lawyers. So it's really a leg up for the lawyers who are frankly a bit dim. I no longer feel the need to pull my punches on this, Alex. Years ago, I would never have said that. I would never have just been honest. But it's about time we had some honesty. If we don't have some brutal honesty, we're not going to get out of this. And it's generally a cult that offers the not very able and easy access to public life. And that I think is why the country is falling apart. Because when you have non-merit-based recruitment, your country actually ends up being pretty rubbish. I mean, all they care about is furthering the aims of the Fabian Society and furthering their little cultish aims. Well, that's great, but we actually care about things like the national debt, the economy, justice, law and order, and all of these things are being removed by Fabians. It would not surprise me at all to discover that certain chief constables are Fabians. It would not surprise me at all to discover Fabians really in quite a lot of places, always in receipt of public money, always over-promoted beyond their ability, and all of them marching to the music of the cult.
Let's talk then about some of the more punitive things that they have gotten away with, Joseph, and the sort of things they might want to do, because without a doubt, they are self-professed globalists. They would want to see a one-world government and think that the nation-state stands in the way of that and wants to see the erosion of the concept of the nation-state. They've wanted to see the dismantlement of Western culture and Christianity, because actually that is probably the toughest barricade towards there being a one-world government. People say that actually Fabianism is about making an sort of anglicised one-world government, with Britain sort of pulling the punches, if you will, which I don't particularly take much succour from. But we also know that people like the governor of the Bank of England himself is a Fabian, and Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, outright accuses him of plotting to sell off government gilts to crash the economy to get rid of her as a Prime Minister. This isn't just about kumbaya, we're a little bit lefty and we all hang out together. These people seem to me to get themselves in extreme positions of authority and go to great lengths to do things which are expressly against the national interest because they don't want there to be a nation state.
You're quite right, and I would immediately back up Liz Truss in that statement. What happened to her was egregious. It was a full use of what I would call the dark arts. I want you to think about it this way. Everything they do is to try and centralize. The nation state is not good for them because it fractures. It gives you a loyalty to something that isn't central. They want you to own nothing and be happy, essentially, where we heard that language before. Well, of course, from the World Economic Forum, which pushes an agenda that is started both by the Fabians and also by another group, the Frankfurt School, who were influential in pushing European communism. These are all very similar movements. They all have similar end goals: the destruction of the nuclear family, the destruction of religion, the destruction of the nation state, the centralization of funds, taking away the right to private property. These are very, very sinister people, and they do it essentially, as Stephen has outlined, through international law, through globalization, through supranationalization, through taking away your ties to what is real and immediate and secure and in your community. And the antidote to that, in my opinion, is what we're seeing happening in certain countries, like what's happened with Javier Milei, where he's slashed the bureaucracy in Argentina, what's happening to an extent in America with Trump in his second term, and what's happened in places like Hungary, where Viktor Orban has fought back against a very socialist deep state. These countries are doing the right thing by returning to communities, returning to nationhood, returning to religion, returning to families, putting motherhood at the forefront of what goes on in society and fatherhood at the forefront of what goes on in society, rather than the Bank of England and the exchange rate. And I think what we need to do, if we're serious about ever toppling this calculated, cold, 140-year-old regime, is to start thinking seriously about what makes us us. What is it in our communities, in our nation state, in our families that keeps us going? And as Stephen says, just about holding on and holding off these, what I would call wolves. They are wolves. They're not in sheep's clothing. They're wolves. They're out in the open now. They're prowling. And they will catch us unless we actually get our act together, get a majority in 2029 or sooner than that, and slash the administrative state, because that's where they sit. They sit in Whitehall. They sit in the judiciary. They sit on the boards of universities. These are not all politicians. It happens that they have a political government that is completely expedient to their will right now. But even when the Tories were in, they were working. And that's why they were so ineffective in government, because they wanted to be an extension of New Labour. David Cameron said it. I want to be the heir to Blair. And so we see that they're just falling into the trap. It's two sides of the same coin. The Uniparty needs to be slashed, it needs to be destroyed, and it needs to be replaced.
I mean, Stephen, let's have a look at the first year, phase one, as Sir Keir Starmer might call it, of his government, and considering he's now put out some videos saying he's in phase two. But phase one, to me, seems to already have dealt some pretty strong tasting Fabian meat unto the population, whether it seems to be essentially using inheritance tax to strip farmers of their land, whether it's nationalising the energy grid and pushing for these sort of mad globalist net zero socialist agendas, whether it is so many things. Lord Hermer and Philip Sands, both from the Matrix chambers, Fabians indeed, working with Mauritius against the UK government to make sure British overseas territories are handed back. And of course, the biggies, I would argue, is this constant mad open border stuff where they say, well, we can't do anything, international law. They don't want to do anything. They believe in flooding the nation with people from the outside world. They want to see it happen. And I think that what Starmer's done in the first year is almost like the playbook, the 101 of this socialist dystopia, that this weird organisation that seems to be very effective at getting its own way. It seems to me that it's all been on steroids.
Well, I call it a cult for a reason, Alex, and that's because a cult is a replacement for religion. And really what these people are doing is trying to deal with the fact that we as humans are mortal creatures, that we will die, and that's very disturbing for many of us. You know, I'm not going to pretend it's different for me. We're all in this together. I think the healthy way that human beings deal with that is by a kind and loving religion. Religions can go off the boil and be a bit nasty and a bit stabby, but, you know, broadly speaking, a kind and loving religion is a nice and comforting way to deal with the simple realities of our life. These people are sort of quasi-tragic figures. I mean, I don't see Lord Hermer as a threat. I'm not scared of Keir Starmer. I see these people as particularly wet, weak men, pale shadows of men, not real people at all, just cultists aligning with an ideology. And what we've got to do, I think, is get them away from power, because life is simply too serious now. And I'll flag up a big one to you and your listeners and viewers. They've pushed the budget back till the 26th of November. That's pretty much as late as it can go. And the reason they've done that is because they can't, if they stay in their cult, the Fabian cult cannot deal with the massive budgetary black hole that's coming up. I think Kwasi said it's something like 42 billion. They can't raise any more money by taxes because taxes are too high and the Laffer curve is real. The Fabian Society is basically getting all of its way and then smashing headfirst into the wall that is reality, which is that no, you can't just keep raising taxes. No, you aren't special, you know, God's children with you know, amazing powers. You're still men. I mean, I always like to point out that Phillips Sands is just a 60-year-old in a t-shirt. Okay, that when I was little, 60-year-olds didn't wear t-shirts, and you know, it's not what we are. We've got to get power back into the hands of sensible Democrats of any party, and I always like to, I think Joseph's right to say the uniparty, because it would be very, very wrong for anybody to point at the Labour Party and just blame them. I don't think that's fair, and I think we will find once we get the membership list, and let's face it, one day we're going to get the membership list. We're going to find them in all of the parties, and many good people on the left, many good people in Labour will not be a member of the Fabian Society, and they'll be all the left-wing people that we adore. I mean, I could name some, but I don't get you in trouble with Ofcom or anything, but there are loads. You know, I think the era of party politics is almost going to have to go on pause while we deal with this conspiracy, and that's what it is. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy fact. And you know, and for years they laughed at us and they mocked at us and they pretended that we were this and that we were that. The one I really like to get across, Alex, at every opportunity is calling us racists only ever worked because we're not racist.
Right.
If you meet an actual racist, they're quite proud to be racist.
That's true. But the thing is, Joseph, you know, I find them quite chilling because they have succeeded in so many ways of creating what I consider to be irreparable damage. The mass demographic change that started under Tony Blair, that's gone absolutely tonto in latter years, is extremely hard to reverse. Crashing an economy takes years to repair. Dragging out from the roots all of the sort of so-called misnomered human rights legislation that seems to victimise the victim and give rights to people who, frankly, shouldn't deserve any. And now, of course, the latest thing they're talking about, straight out of the Fabian playbook, is digital ID. They seem to be getting their own way. They're being able to put in place, when we go, what on earth going on? We spent 50 years, right, in the last century fighting communism, trillions of dollars trying to wipe it off the face of the earth, and now we've elected it in and they're going hell for leather, and we're going, isn't this weird? What's happened to Britain? I wonder what's going on. Who's behind this? Is it Bill Gates? Well, it's clear to me now that what's behind it is this society, who have in fact been extremely successful, I would say, in putting into place the instruments of their dystopian ideology.
We've all heard the phrase crisis management, and I want you to have that in mind, because what these people are purveyors of crisis. They don't work in revolutions. That was tried, it failed, particularly in Britain, by the way. Britain is the last bastion. It's one of the major countries in Europe that never gave in to communism. And there's a reason for that. Our people are not minded to it. And boy, did they try. That's what the Cold War was all about. They wanted to gobble up Britain. And they realized that the only way to do it was through a series of small crises rather than one large one. And what you do over time time when you develop crises like these is you think about traps to set so that the people will be more expedient to do what you want them to do. And when they do what you want, you then introduce legislation, or you introduce an act, or you introduce something that will take away or curtail one of their freedoms to get over the crisis. So we saw this most of all, most recently in COVID, of course, where people were locked down for their own good, even though we then found out it wasn't for their own good. But in that time, all kinds of changes happened. Immigration started flooding in the so-called Boris wave. You know, there were many things, many freedoms that we've just accepted as lost forever. The same thing happens every time there's a major crisis. There's always a solution. During the financial crash, a lot of things changed in this country. And now, because people are going around putting up England flags, they're going to introduce digital ID. Well, you've got to ask, maybe that was manufactured to an extent. I see Keir sitting there with all of his George's crosses in the background and his little mantelpiece, and I don't think that that's by accident. These people will work with whatever they've got just to take away your freedoms and curtail your liberties, and the only way you fight back is to play them at their own game. If they want to take over and they want to dismantle your way of life, you must do the same in response. And the only way to do that is to sweep into Whitehall and sweep into the Houses of Commons with a massive majority and enact in the first 100 days of government sweeping changes that cannot be reversed immediately, because we have 140 years to undo in the space of, let's call it what it is, probably 2 to 4 years once we're in government, because the UK is not just in an economic crisis, it is absolutely bankrupt. I don't think people realise quite how bad the figures are, not just on immigration, but also on the economy.
Yeah, and Joseph, on that, so I think it's going to be interesting how this plays out, because Starmer's just made his economics advisor ahead of the budget, the former deputy governor of the Bank of England, a Fabian. Of course, the governor of the Bank of England's a Fabian, but she was also deputy director of the IMF and the World Bank. So she's a woman. If we are going to have to go, this is the thing, right? If we have to go to the IMF for the charity check, you know what they do? They put in place their terms and conditions. They come in and essentially start deciding what we're taxed and how this country is run in order to get that money to bail us out. And I do wonder now, with her appointment, how this is all going to play out. Guys, I could talk about this forever. Thank you so much for giving up so long of your evening to enlighten us all on this really fascinating subject.